The signs of collapse began discreetly, almost imperceptibly. Production lines were halted, warehouses operated below capacity, and strategic stockpiles were reduced without public explanation. Within a few months, a pattern began to repeat itself in different American states. The richest country on the planet was showing the first signs of a food imbalance that until then seemed impossible. While headlines speak of growth and stability, internal data tells a different story. The number of people resorting to food banks has reached record levels, surpassing even the most critical periods of the 2008 crisis. Entire families, previously supported by formal employment, now face food insecurity. And behind the scenes, experts warn, this is not a lack of production, but a structural failure that compromises the very basis of distribution and access. America, a symbol of global abundance, is beginning to reveal a painful contradiction. Never has so much food been produced, and never has so much hunger been suffered. Inequality, coupled with rising logistical costs and financial speculation on commodities, has transformed the food system into an invisible field of tension. This documentary investigates what is really happening behind the statistics. Why is the country that feeds the world beginning to struggle to feed itself? And what do these silent numbers reveal about the future of global food security? If you want to understand the real causes behind this collapse and what it reveals about the future of America, subscribe to the channel now and follow this investigation to the end. What is about to be revealed may change the way you see the geography of power and scarcity in the United States. On the streets of Chicago, the shop windows remain lit, but the gazes have lost their sparkle. There is a type of poverty that doesn't appear in the statistics, one that wears a uniform, pays taxes, and yet, at night, calculates whether there will be enough money left for dinner. This is the new American middle class, which no longer lives but merely manages its own decline. Families are learning to replace meat with canned goods, mix milk with water, and use apps that alert them to where leftover meals discarded by restaurants are located. Everything is presented as a sustainable alternative, but in reality, it's survival disguised as ecological awareness. In supermarkets that once symbolized abundance, saving money is now measured in steps. Many enter, walk. The aisles compare prices and leave empty-handed. The gesture is always the same. A long pause before the price tag, a fixed gaze, a silent resignation. These scenes are repeated in Detroit, Houston, Atlanta. The shelves are full, but the baskets remain empty. Food inflation, treated as a temporary phenomenon, has become routine, and the silence of the authorities is the noise that echoes in every aisle. Meanwhile, the lines outside food banks double in size every winter. In some states, families wait up to 3 hours for a bag of basic supplies. There, amidst weary voices and gloved hands, a phrase is repeated with disturbing frequency: "I never thought I'd be here." It's a portrait of a country that maintains the appearance of prosperity, but whose foundation is slowly crumbling, like a building collapsing from the inside. Official statistics speak of growth, but in kitchens the clock ticks a different time, the time of improvisation, rationing, and waiting. An entire generation is learning to eat with fear. And when fear begins to shape appetite, hunger ceases to be an economic problem and becomes a collective psychological phenomenon. But there's something even more unsettling. Behind this growing scarcity, there are seemingly calculated decisions, invisible strategies that transform desperation into profit. Who is really profiting from this crisis, and who is paying the price? Share your opinion in the comments below. While the public narrative insists on blaming the pandemic, international conflicts, or market fluctuations, a set of less visible decisions paints the true picture of scarcity. Behind the scenes of the American food system, a few corporations concentrate control over almost everything that reaches the table, from seed to plate. 4 conglomerates dominate more than 80% of meat processing, another 3 control the flow of grains and cereals, and each price adjustment, each sudden shortage, each product that disappears from the shelves follows the same pattern. The greater the chaos, the greater the profit accumulated in the boardrooms. These companies don't operate with the goal of feeding people, but of feeding financial indices. Food, once a basic right, has become a speculative asset, traded on stock exchanges that treat hunger as an opportunity for growth. When the price of wheat rises, annual reports celebrate record margins. When the cost of milk increases, stocks soar. What represents hardship and humiliation? For millions is, for a select few, simply the cold logic of the market working perfectly. There is also the political factor, less reported but more decisive. Agricultural subsidy programs were designed to favor large exporters, not small local producers. The incentives that once sustained family farms now serve to strengthen the power of giant corporations, consolidating a cycle in which the small disappears and the large decides the price of what everyone eats. The modern food chain has been reorganized to concentrate power, and this silent and strategic concentration is the true engine of the crisis. In official reports, this reality is masked by elegant terminology: supply adjustment, logistical readjustment, production optimization. But behind these neutral terms, the result is devastating: the progressive erosion of the power of choice. America is not running out of food, it is running out of autonomy. And when autonomy is lost, consumption transforms into disguised dependence. Still, one question lingers like a shadow over the statistics. If the collapse is not a result of chance, to what extent is there planning behind this scarcity? And who really benefits when hunger is managed as a predictable business? The repercussions of this system are not limited to the cold numbers in economic reports. They manifest themselves slowly, almost imperceptibly, in family routines, in habits that change without anyone noticing. In suburbs once teeming with supermarkets and bakeries, so-called food deserts are multiplying. Regions where fresh foods have disappeared, replaced by ultra-processed and cheap products that fill the stomach but empty the body of nutrients. It is a form of hunger that is not seen, but accumulates in medical exams, in tired hearts, in numbed minds. Increased scarcity also fuels increased debt. People resort to credit to buy food, and the next month's meal is already compromised by the interest from the previous one. The act of eating, once so commonplace, has become a financial transaction. In states like Ohio, Nevada, and Arizona, communities are emerging that share gardens and sheds, trying to rebuild lost self-sufficiency. But resistance is weak against the power of a market that dictates prices based on algorithms and speculations that change every minute. The psychological effects are equally devastating. Silent hunger produces a guilt that doesn't show up in diagnoses. Parents feel like failures when they see their children asking for what they can't afford. Elderly people choose to skip meals to pay for medication. Food, a symbol of unity and celebration, has become a source of anguish. Each year, the number of Americans reporting anxiety associated with grocery shopping grows. And this statistic, however abstract it may seem, reveals the exhaustion of a model that is collapsing from within. What is most alarming is that all this is happening without major visible disasters, without wars or epidemics. The American food crisis didn't arrive with explosions, but with silences. And this silence is more dangerous than any scream. It spreads invisibly through kitchens, markets, and tables that now hold smaller plates of food. But among all these signs of collapse, there is one face, one story, and one name that encapsulate the drama of millions. Who is the woman who symbolizes the hidden suffering of a nation that still insists on appearing complacent? Comment below with your opinion. His name is Rebecca Hill. Rebecca's story could easily go unnoticed among the many others that accumulate in small American towns. For more than 2 decades, Rebecca worked as a manager at a local supermarket in rural Ohio. She was an exemplary employee, responsible for overseeing the same aisles that, ironically, she would one day walk as a customer seeking donations. When the chain announced the closure of its least profitable branches, she was laid off with a generic thank you letter and a severance check that didn't even cover 2 months' rent. In the early days, Rebecca believed she would find another job. She had experience, references, and knew the sector better than anyone. But the market had changed. The new supermarkets were automated, and human jobs were replaced by systems. Over time, her savings dwindled. The refrigerator grew empty, the gas ran out, and the silence of the house began to feel heavier than the hunger itself. When she finally sought help at a food bank, she found familiar faces, former customers, neighbors, co-workers, all in line waiting for the same package of rice, the same liter of milk. Rebecca speaks little. She says the hardest part isn't feeling hungry, but losing her sense of purpose, the silent dignity of someone who once believed that work was enough to survive. Today she lives with her daughter and grandson in a small rented house. She survives on government assistance and what remains of local solidarity. She still keeps her old ID badge, stored in a drawer, as a reminder of a time when effort seemed to have value. Rebecca's story is not an exception, it's a mirror. Because behind every statistic lies an interrupted life, a biography swallowed up by the normality of collapse. But what do the official numbers say? What do the spreadsheets hide when hunger becomes a statistic and despair is expressed as a percentage? Numbers, when analyzed without emotion, seem harmless. But a few seconds of silence are enough for them to reveal what they truly represent: stories of deprivation, despair, and survival. Today, more than 8.4 million Americans regularly rely on food banks, a contingent larger than the entire population of Canada. In other words, 1 in 8 inhabitants of the richest country on the planet needs help to put food on their plate. Among children, the situation is even more alarming. 1 in 6 people doesn't know if they will have food to eat next week. This data doesn't come from charities, but from official bodies, although it's rarely featured in headlines. Millions of students attend public schools not only to learn, but to secure their only balanced meal of the day. When the holidays arrive, child malnutrition statistics rise, discreetly, almost invisible, like a shadow cast over empty schoolyards. Another disturbing fact: 62% of workers earning minimum wage admit to skipping meals to pay for rent or transportation. This means that hunger is no longer a consequence of unemployment, but a direct effect of work itself. Working and still going hungry has become part of modern logic, a contradiction that no one wants to acknowledge. And while those at the base of the pyramid tighten their belts, those at the top accumulate records. The 5 largest supermarket chains in the United States recorded a 230% increase in profits since 2020. In parallel, it is estimated that 48% of all food produced in the country is wasted before it even reaches the table. Millions of tons are discarded. Annually, often for aesthetic reasons, irregularly shaped tomatoes, substandard fruit products nearing their expiration date. These are the forbidden numbers, those who don't appear in public reports because they challenge the idea that the food collapse is only temporary. They dismantle the optimistic narrative and reveal a system in which hunger is functional, predictable, and profitable. The inevitable question, however, goes beyond the graphs. Does the country still produce food in abundance? Is there enough technology to feed everyone? Why does scarcity continue to grow? And more, what will happen when food ceases to be merely a commodity and becomes the new symbol of power? Experts call it a cyclical supply crisis, a clean technical term that attempts to soften what is really happening, the beginning of a structural shift that redefines the meaning of the word abundance. What was once considered basic, rice, milk, vegetables, is beginning to migrate into the category of selective goods. In large cities, premium supermarket chains sell simple foods with sophisticated labels, while entire communities survive on donations. Food has become the new social marker, the new symbol of privilege. The future scenario, as outlined by independent reports, is bleaker than any recent crisis. If the current pace continues, by 2030, 1/3 of the American population could face recurring food insecurity. This means that the collapse, until now fragmented, will become a collective and inevitable experience. What began as economic hardship transforms into cultural rupture. Families relearn to share what little they have. Neighbors create exchange networks, and the concept of abundance comes to exist only in memory. The government reacts with palliative programs, while the media avoids headlines that might alarm investors. Institutional silence is the perfect fuel for the normalization of collapse. There is no explosion, no visible tragedy, only the constant sound of empty refrigerators in brightly lit homes. It is the discreet ruin of a model that is exhausting itself without admitting failure. And when hunger ceases to shock, when scandal becomes routine, collapse has already won. Not through force, but through indifference. The future is no longer heralded by sudden catastrophes. It infiltrates habits, postponed purchases, and reduced shelves. The question now is no longer if the collapse will affect everyone, but when and how will each person realize that it is already inside them? And between this approaching future and the present that feigns stability, only one unsettling question remains. What is truly starving, the body or the collective consciousness? The food crisis in the United States is not merely a reflection of the economy, it's a mirror of a society that has confused progress with consumption and freedom with dependence. The spreading hunger has no defined face. It hides in silent suburbs, in brightly lit apartments, in families who still believe that it will pass. But what is happening is something deeper, a moral erosion, a collective numbness in the face of scarcity. When food becomes a privilege and waste, routine imbalance ceases to be an exception. It becomes identity. America, which once fed the world, now grapples with a void that cannot be measured in statistics. It is a spiritual void, the same one that consumes civilizations when they believe they can live without looking after those left behind. Poverty, once seen as an economic consequence, reveals itself here as an emotional illness, the result of a system that has exhausted the meaning of sharing. And perhaps that is why the still full shelves offer no comfort, because what is lacking is not food, but compassion. The silence surrounding this issue is as deafening as the metallic clinking of the coins that support it. The truth is before everyone, but few still have the courage to face it. And perhaps in the end, the biggest question isn't, how did we get here? But if there is still time to relearn what it means to nourish ourselves, not just the body, but the collective spirit of a nation that has forgotten the taste of empathy. If this truth needs to continue being told, subscribe now. The voice that exposes the collapse is also the only one that can still prevent the silence.